All right, let's dive into a really big idea. We're going to explore a story that's about 2,500 years old, but it gets to the heart of a question that is just as real for us today as it was back then, all about the ethics of the words we choose to use.
So let's just jump right in with the big one. We're always told to be kind, be nice, right? But is that always the best move? Is there ever a time when you have to say something difficult, something you know might even be painful? Because it's not just an option, it's absolutely necessary.
So funnily enough, our story doesn't actually begin with the Buddha. It starts with one of his rivals, another teacher who thinks he's figured out the perfect way to trap the Buddha in a public debate, to catch him in a logical contradiction.
And how's he going to do it? Well, he gets a well-respected prince, a man named Abhaya, to deliver the challenge. And this isn't just any old question. It's what's called a two-horn dilemma. You know, one of those clever questions where no matter how you answer, you lose.
Okay, so let's break this trap down, because it's actually pretty brilliant. The prince is told to ask a simple question. Does a perfectly enlightened being, a Tathagata, ever say things that people find disagreeable or unwelcome? Now, if the Buddha says yes, then he's just like the rest of us, right? Sometimes harsh. But if he says no, the prince has his follow-up ready. Oh, really? Then what about what you said about your cousin Devadatta being destined for a realm of suffering? I mean, those words definitely made Devadatta angry. It feels like a flawless checkmate.
Yeah, this rival teacher was feeling pretty good about himself. He was absolutely sure this question would leave the Buddha totally speechless, caught on the horns of this dilemma with no good way out.
So the prince agrees to the plan. He invites the Buddha over for a meal, and the next day, after they've eaten, he respectfully sits down and springs the trap. He asks the question.
But the Buddha doesn't walk into it. Instead of a simple yes or no, he immediately takes a step back. He basically says, "Prince, the problem is the question itself. It's too simple. Reality is much more complex than that."
And then he does something just brilliant. He flips the whole conversation around by asking the prince a question about his own infant son, who happens to be sitting right there on his lap. It's a really powerful and personal analogy.
Okay, so let's really lean in here, because what happens next is the absolute heart of this entire teaching on what it means to speak with compassion.
The prince lays out exactly what he'd do. He says, well, first I try to get the stick out very gently. If that didn't work, I'd have to hold his head steady and use my finger like a hook to get it out, even if it made him bleed a little. Because of course, the child's safety is the most important thing.
And that's the key, the motivation. Why would a father risk causing his own son even a moment of pain? He says it himself, loud and clear. Because he has compassion for the child. It's all about preventing a much greater harm.
And this is where it all clicks into place. The Buddha uses this exact analogy, the compassionate father, to brilliantly lay out his own rules for speech. And what's amazing is how this builds into a practical framework that we can all actually use. So check this out. It's so simple when you see it in a grid. The Buddha says that if words are untrue, or if they're true but totally useless, he just doesn't say them. Ever. It doesn't matter if they sound nice or not, they're just off the table. The only words he even considers saying are the ones that pass a three-part test. They have to be true, they have to be factual, and they have to be beneficial.
That's the filter, right there. Notice how will the other person like it isn't the first question. The main question is it true, and will it help? If the answer is yes to both, then and only then is it a candidate for being spoken.
And let's just underline the driving force here. Just like the prince acted out of love for his child, the Buddha's single motivation for saying something that's difficult but helpful is anukampa. It's this deep, active compassion. It's always about preventing a bigger problem or creating a greater good, even if it causes a little discomfort right now. You can imagine the prince at this point. His mind is just blown. He came to set a trap, and instead he's getting this incredible lesson in compassionate communication. So he has to ask, are these brilliant answers something you've prepared, or do they just come to you on the spot?
So the Buddha gives him another beautiful analogy. He asks the prince, "You're an expert with a chariot, right? You know all its parts?" And the prince says, "Of course."
So the Buddha points out, well, if someone asked you to name a part of the chariot, you wouldn't have to think about it, would you? The answer would just come to you instantly, because that knowledge is so deeply ingrained, it's a part of you.
And the Buddha explains that's how his wisdom works. It's not about memorizing lines. It's about having such a deep, direct understanding of the fundamental nature of reality itself, what he calls the Dhamma Dhatu, that the right, compassionate response just arises naturally, perfectly suited to that exact moment.
So let's pull this ancient wisdom right into today. What does this 2,500-year-old conversation mean for us, right now, in our emails, our work meetings, and our conversations over the dinner table?
Well, it gives us an incredibly practical tool, a mental checklist. Before you have to give that tough piece of feedback or talk to a loved one about something difficult, you can just pause for a second and run through these 4 questions. And this really is the core takeaway. The whole point of communication shouldn't just be to avoid conflict or make sure everyone thinks you're nice. The point is to be genuinely helpful. And being helpful, guided by wisdom and real compassion, sometimes means you have to say the hard thing.
And so this ancient story leaves us with a very personal challenge. It invites us to look at our own lives, our relationships, our workplaces, and to ask ourselves, where is my compassion needed most? And what difficult but true and helpful words does that compassion demand I find the courage to speak?